Welcome to Simply Verified Beef, the podcast. I'm Bree Patterson, your co-host from the West Coast of BC. I am the VBP Coordinator in BC, and my other co-host is
Amy Higgins, and I am on the alternative coast, in New Brunswick, as the New Brunswick and Nova Scotia VBP Coordinator.
The Simply Verified Beef podcast is going to cover all topics related to VBP So for those unfamiliar with VBP it's a 4-pillar voluntary program across Canada. We include all producers if you are feedlot or cow-calf. And in the 4 pillars, we discuss animal welfare, on-farm food safety, biosecurity, and environmental stewardship. So these topics throughout our podcasting will fall under one of those 4 pillars or have some sort of overlap in all 4 of them.
And so you'll notice that we're co-hosts. You may see both of us in a podcast episode. You may see one of the 2 of us. We would like to welcome Kendra Keels, who is the Industry Development Director for Veal Farmers of Ontario, and she also works with the Canadian Veal Association. So Kendra, welcome to the Simply Verified Beef podcast.
Thank you very much, Amy, for having me.
The title of this podcast is Simply the Tough Decisions. So we just wanted to chat a little bit about a few things that probably don't get the airtime that maybe they should for fear of negative implications in social media and things like that. But it is a very real part of our business for beef production and in the veal world and really any animal agriculture. I just wanted to go through a couple questions with you, Kendra. So in the Verified Beef Production Plus framework, all of the things sort of support back to the National Farm Animal Care Code. So the Beef Code of Practice is the one that we reference the most. I know that you've been involved with those codes a fair amount. So would you be able to explain a little bit about the codes and how they may have come to be?
Absolutely. I sat when we developed our veal code. I sat on the code development committee, and I actually sit on the current dairy code that's being updated as an observer as well. You know, between dairy and veal, we're so closely connected that it was important that we have a role. Dairy farmers had a role with our code, and we have a role with the dairy code. So yeah, we've learned a lot. And I also sit as a director with the National Farm Animal Care Council and have done since 2014, I think. So for quite some time. So the codes of practice are actually nationally developed guidelines for the care and handling of farm animals. And they serve as our national understanding of animal care requirements and recommended codes of practice. We work with a code development committee and a scientific committee. So when a code wants to go forward first, they get together and there's a whole bunch of people involved. There's farmers, there's transporters, veterinarians, animal welfare, government agencies, retail and food service, processors, and government and researchers. So the code development committee has a lot of different people who are involved with the animal agriculture and who have an interest to make sure that the codes are developed the way they should be developed. So, and it's great to have the different input from the different stakeholders as well. So a priority welfare list will be developed initially at the beginning, and then the code, the scientific committee will go back and they will do all of the research to see on these priority areas. And if there isn't any research, or if there is, then it will support. And so then it comes back to, the codes that are science and consensus based. And consensus based is a big part of that. The science is key, but consensus based because there isn't a lot of research in a lot of different areas that you need to have. You need to have that science, but it's not there. So that's where the input from the producers comes from, because these guys are the ones that are boots on the ground. They're doing it every day. They know what's working, what's not working. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that they are science and consensus based to develop the code. It's a unique thing to go through the code development process, and it's something different that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. So Canada is very fortunate that we have that process. And I'll just say that the first codes were developed back in the 80s, and they've been updated periodically throughout, but now the last few years with the National Farm Animal Care Council, 2009 was the first time the dairy code went through with the new process. So they do that development. 5 years later, they do a code review, and 10 years later, they do a code update. So that's new since 2009. Everybody recognizes the codes and the value of the codes, but not all the provinces hold the codes to the same standards. In Ontario, for instance, if there's a farm that is called upon by somebody's reported something they'd seen they didn't like, the Provincial Animal Welfare Services would go and they would use the code as the industry standard that farm would be held to. So if there's something in there, then that's what they're saying. Okay, your code says, and then they will have a directive to update. But not all provinces have that same power.
So where can people find the codes are online, correct? And we can put the links in the show notes, but they're generally right now all online. There's some printed copies that some of the industry associations might have if somebody's looking for a copy.
Exactly. The printed copies, there's not a lot of copies around that are printed, but online for sure, you can go onto the National Farm Animal Care Council and get a copy of any code that you want. And then each of the commodity organizations have a link on their pages, nationally for sure, and most likely provincially, but I haven't checked every single link to see if they all do. I can tell you that we do for sure. Just going back to about the printed copies, it's a good thing that we all didn't have hundreds of thousands of copies of printed, because when the transportation regulations updated, when they were amended, all of our codes were on the transportation part of it. They were outdated. So electronically, we were able to turn on a dime and have that. So the National Farm Animal Care Council put a team together and worked on all of those so they could update all the codes that had already been done, because of this new update, the age of technology.
We will put the website in the show notes so that everyone who's listening has access. So even if you have a printed copy, like Kendra said, no guarantee that it is the most recent copy. So
exactly,
online you'll be able to guarantee that you're in the most recent iteration of the code. So Kendra, you touched on the changing transportation regulations. It's a fairly hot topic in certain circles and in certain areas. I know that there was the definition around compromised and unfit. Can you walk us through making some of that decision on what defines compromised and unfit as it relates to transporting?
Absolutely. Transport is stressful for cattle, for all animals, but I work in the cattle industry, so all my work is so that it's very stressful. The commingling, the arrival of new calves, the exposure to pathogens, loading, unloading, all of that stuff. It's hard on these calves. So before an animal leaves your farm, you really want to make sure that you're sending out an animal that's in excellent condition, because you're now going to be putting some stress on the calf. Even if it's the best day in all of the year, sunny, dry, no weather conditions, no traffic accidents, everything's perfect. It's still a stress because you've taken this, and I'm going to use a calf as an example. You've taken this calf, you've loaded him on a truck with 300 of his new best friends. So, and it's hard on those animals. So when the amended transportation regulations came out, they were very clear on the definitions of an unfit animal and a compromised animal. One thing that we did at Veal Farmers of Ontario is we really tried to communicate that out in different ways so that people had a good understanding of that. I'll just give you the list of what a compromise, and it is different for other species, but in the calf world, if they're compromised, they can only be transported in isolation from other animals. They must be loaded and unloaded individually without having to go down a ramp, and they cannot go to a sales barn. So that's really important. And I'll give you the list of what classifies a compromised animal. Bloated with no signs of discomfort or weakness, acute frostbite, is still healing from a procedure like castration or dehorning, shows signs of lameness other than what is described as unfit, has a deformity or fully healed amputation that doesn't show signs of pain from that condition, displays any other signs of infirmity, illness, injury, or a condition that might make the calf less able to withstand the rigors of transport. So that's a compromised animal. An unfit is very different. So an unfit animal, they are not supposed to be transported unless it's at the recommendation of a veterinarian and only to receive veterinary care. So I think when this list came out, there were some people who maybe didn't necessarily agree with some of these conditions, but you just have to remember the stress that these calves are under when they leave the dairy farm. They go to a sales barn, they get loaded, they could be transported for another 12 hours, 16 hours, even when they're before the new regulations. So you don't know. So you really wanted to have the strongest, healthiest calf that you could send out. So an unfit calf has one or more of these conditions. It can't walk. It has a fractured leg that prevents it from walking or causes it to show pain, is lame in one or more of the limbs showing pain, halted movements, reluctance to walk, or can't walk on its four legs, is in shock or dying, has labored breathing, has a severe open wound or laceration, is hobbled for treatment of an injury, is extremely thin, shows signs of dehydration, exhaustion, hypothermia, hyperthermia, or has a fever. Wow, right there. That's one of those ones that really drew a lot of attention to us in the calf world, because technically most of our calves show signs of dehydration. And there is a scale for dehydration. It's not necessarily that they were severe, but they do show some signs. So if the calf, for instance, was fed the night before, the trucker showed up in the morning to load the calf. So he didn't get fed since 5 or 6 o'clock last night, but the trucker's there at 5 or 6 in the morning before the next feeding. The calf could be loaded. The calf could end up getting scours. By the time it gets to where it's going, it's in pretty rough shape. So that was one that for sure raised some red flags. Has a hernia that hinders its movement, causes pain, touches the ground when the calf is standing, or has an open wound, ulceration, or infection. And then the next one that caught a lot of attention was has an unhealed and or infected navel. I spend an enormous amount of my time on navels. I used to buy calves for years. I bought calves for a large veal operation. My job was, when those calves arrived, was to check the navels. I checked for hernias, I checked for infection, I checked to make sure they were healed. And I would say that, I probably have palpated more navels than most people in the world. But anyways, it's one of those things that when that calf has, and most dairy farmers do not look at the navel before the calf is loaded. They just, the trucker's here, the calf is ready to go. They don't even think about it. And I had so many aha moments when I was buying calves. The dairy farmer would bring the calf in, I'd feel the navel, I could feel it's infected. I look down at the navel and you see the pus. And you show the farmer, this navel is infected. First question back, what do you mean? I say, look at this navel. I had no idea. You need to check the navels. You reject those calves, but now because of the age of the calves, and they do check at sales barns now, or they're supposed to be checking at sales barns now for that. So check your navels before you load those calves. If you're at anywhere in doubt, hold them back another week. The last two that constitute for unfit has severe bloat that is causing pain or weakness, has other signs of infirmity, illness, injury, or condition that causes the calf to suffer during transport. So really the signs of dehydration and the infected navel or unhealed navel were the ones that really got a lot of attention on this list. So, and how they got to the 8 days or older before transport was because of the navel. It was the feeling from all the research supported that a calf, by the time they are 8 days of age, that navel is healed and they're able to be transported. That's one of the big things. So check those navels. You will save yourself a lot of grief if you take 2 minutes before the calf leaves to do that. So the unfit and compromised, for the most part, it's the unfit that causes our producers grief.
And I know, Kendra, you've been talking a lot about that calf, that really young calf in terms of transportation. And I do have, I don't know if you can see this, Kendra, but I've got the very fancy Veal Farmers of Ontario compromised unfit grid for the decision making.
We did that.
Yeah, we'll be able to post that to the show notes as well, so that folks have an idea. On that too, it's not just for calves. So all of those things that Kendra had commented on, that list is for all ages of beef animals. If you've got something that is extremely dehydrated, whether it's a young calf, whether it's an older feeder that's heading to the feedlot, or whatever the case may be, there's just different ways that different ages exhibit. And like Kendra had mentioned, the navel is a super great early indicator of future issues in that age grade. And for our young beef calves too, I mean, you don't want navel infections, and we're just not generally transporting them from the beef farm at that age. But I think it is very interesting to see what those different compromised versus unfit look like.
Absolutely. Can I just add one thing, Amy?
Yeah.
You know, the animals that you send off your farm are a reflection of you as a farmer. So if you're always that person who's getting animals sent back because there's something wrong with them, that is a reflection of what the job that you're doing. And you should not be upset that they're sending them back. You should take notice that you need to make some management changes on your farm, because they will keep coming back.
That's a really good point. And we do talk to some transporters who do have to have that conversation with producers or ranchers or farmers. And it's not a good conversation for anybody to have. I mean, the transporter doesn't want to have that conversation either. But at the end of the day, this animal is kind of trumps all. So treating that with good intentions is the most important thing. So it is a little bit of a sensitive subject. And as my grandfather used to say, when you're raising livestock, you also have to deal with dead stock. And euthanasia can be a hot button topic in agriculture, especially animal agriculture in general. In your experience, what are some of the things that play into deciding, or that decision-making process, to euthanize humanely?
You know, for farmers, this is probably one of the most difficult decisions that they have to make on the farm. And a farmer by nature is a very caring, and they will move heaven and hell to keep an animal alive. And when they make that decision that the animal has to be euthanized, it's a very difficult and hard one for them. And sometimes maybe the decision gets made a little bit too late. You know, there's a saying in animal agriculture, it's better to be a day early than a day late, because the animal, when they are going through that convalescent period and they're not going to get better, and it's just not fair to the animal, and you just have to make that decision. What helps with that decision-making process is having a protocol established on the farm, so that you know who's going to make the decision, who's going to do the deed, and if the main person's not there, who's the backup person? Because, you know, people have a day off and something happens, they need to know who's the other person that can euthanize humanely. And, you know, it's simple that your veterinarian can help you develop the protocol for your farm, and they can do the training for you as well. Not everybody is comfortable to have a gun on their farm to euthanize, but there is a captive bolt, and they just have to learn the secondary method of something like pithing or something like that. And, you know, just where you're going to do it, how you're going to dispose of the animal, and all of those things. It's hard, but I really find when there's a plan already established ahead of time, it makes it a little bit easier. When I was working on the farm, I was not the person who was actually going to do the deed. I could make the decision, this calf's not going to get any better, it needs to be euthanized, but I was not going to be the one to do it. So, but we knew who that person was. And remember, I was working on a large veal operation. So we did occasionally have to euthanize an animal, but we had a plan. And if that person wasn't there, we had the next person. Me as an employee, I was more comfortable because there was that plan in place as well. And I think that's the same, even if it's a family farm, who, you know, as long as the other members of the family know what the plan is. And, you know, if you're a larger farm and you have staff, you don't just want anybody making those decisions. You want to have an appointed person of authority that can make that decision in a timely manner.
And I think that goes a part of Verified Beef Production Plus, the VBP Plus program. We talk about having a plan for treatment. So who's going to treat that calf if it's sick, what the steps are, who's trained and eligible to make that treatment plan. So just carrying that forward, that extra step, and making that protocol for this particular job I think is just, it's just good practice. And so that is one of the things that the VBP Plus program does provide. And we reference back to the code, and they've got some pretty good resources within the code on humane euthanasia, and making sure that you've got the right tool for the right job, because what the needs are for a calf are different than what the needs are for a 4-year-old bull, for example, who might have tripped in a divot and broken a leg or something like that. So there may be two different tools that might be needed depending on what you're dealing with from what's on your farm that you're having to deal with at that particular moment.
And in addition to the codes of practice, for us, we do have fairly extensive information on euthanizing and setting up protocols, and we've developed some resources that are available for download as well on euthanasia as well.
We can put those in the show notes as well, so that everybody will have access to them.
We recognize that this is one of the most uncomfortable things that people don't want to talk about, they don't want to do, but it's also the weakness in all of our industries. It doesn't matter what livestock you're dealing with. The euthanasia part is the weakness that consumers don't want to see. It's the thing that looks bad on negative publicity. So we want to make sure that it's done right, it's done timely, and it's done behind closed doors.
Yes. The transparency that it happens and it is a fact of life is one thing, but to make sure that it's it's done in the right way all around is also very important for the future of industry. So going back to the changing transport regulations, Kendra, I know that we had chatted about them before. Do you have any other comments on the transport regs?
The transportation regulations were a long time, and I forget how many years, I believe it was 20, but I have to double check on that, in updating and doing those amendments. There's a lot of people who are interested in those transportation regulations amendments. You know, Canada is a very large country, and to draft an amendment that's going to work for every part of the country is no easy feat. What works for us in Ontario is not what's going to work in the Maritimes. It's just, you know, you're a long way from your markets. Locally, you can only do so much, but if you want to grow, you need to go somewhere else. So it's just agriculture, it's livestock, transportation. Transportation is something that our special interest groups monitor very closely as well. And they make a lot of attention for a lot of people on the transportation. So again, you want to be doing the best when you send those animals out that you're sending, and, you know, accidents happen. Have a plan in place, a contingency plan if there's bad weather or something happens. As producers, as transporters, we all have to do our part to make sure that we are well prepared. We know we get snowstorms, we know we get freezing rain, we know we get, you know, traffic accidents. We need to be prepared and have a plan, go over this, have it written down. Everybody knows who the contact people are. And, you know, we do our best and we send out our best, and we do it with the utmost pride that farmers do. We care about our jobs, we care about the products we produce, and transportation is a part of that, and we'll do the best that we can. Farming is very different than it was 25 years ago. There's a lot of people watching, and you just need to make sure that you're doing your very best. And if something does happen and they come back and say, I had a plan, here's what my contingency plan was, here's what, you know, nobody will fault you if you have that plan already drafted. It's when you say, I didn't know anything was going to happen, then they look at you a little differently.
Yeah.
So when you ship your best, you've got your plan for any kind of emergencies, and that's all you can do. That's just my 2 cents.
Right. You and I have worked, Kendra, on a couple projects with this whole dairy beef and some of this young calf care content that you guys have been subject matter experts in doing the research and all of that jazz on. So we've been stealing shamelessly from some of the resources that you guys have used.
We're very happy that somebody's using it.
One of the things that I thought was a little odd in the National Farm Care Codes are that in the beef code, pain mitigation is required for dehorning and castration at over 6 months. But in the dairy and veal codes, it is required at any age. And I guess I understand that the castration doesn't generally happen within the veal place, but it it struck me as odd that with the same codes, there could be two different guidelines on pain mitigation, because one would think that a dairy calf or something, a dairy beef cross calf would be the same as a straight beef calf. Any comment there? How does that play in? And
because I don't know what the age is in the beef code. And for us on the veal code, it needs to be done as young as possible. That's ours. The dairy code, they were the first ones out of the gate. So in 2009, they had their code. And I, again, don't know what their requirement is for pain management. Just knowing that what happened in 2009 is very different than when the beef code came out next in 2013. And then we came out in 2017. And ours is as young as possible, because when we were doing the veal code, we didn't even have somebody from the beef industry on our code. But then when we came to that, and the code development committee wanted to include calves being started for the dairy beef market. So in 2013, 14, 15, when we were starting to develop our code, the dairy beef market was just really getting going. And they recognized that a lot of those calves were being started in facilities similar to a veal operation. So they wanted to ensure that the same requirements around pain mitigation were included from what was in the beef code. So we had Brady Stucknicki that he came on to our code development committee, and he offered that. So we tried to mirror, but they wanted it done as young as possible for us, because our calves, recognizing that our calves may only be at that facility until they're 250 pounds. So
right.
In the veal world, we don't dehorn or castrate, but we had to include those calves being started for the dairy beef industry.
In the beef code, it says that castration must be performed by competent personnel and all of that good stuff, and seek guidance from your veterinarian on the optimum method and timing. Castrate calves as young as practically possible, which all makes reasonable sense, but effective January 1st, 2018, use pain control in consultation with your veterinarian when castrating bulls older than 6 months of age. Then that was an adjustment from 2016 when it was older than 9 months of age. It reads different in the veal code because it is used pain mitigation at any age, which I think is probably quite reasonable, knowing the things that we know about performance on calf performance under stress in some of these instances.
Right. And then just knowing that for us, for those calves, it's only until they're weaned. So we only have those calves being started for the dairy beef market until they're weaned, then they go off, and then they fall under the beef code. So if they were not dehorned or castrated while they were on our operation, then they go to a beef farm, like a dairy beef farm, they fall under the beef code then. So they only fall under the veal code when they're being started that until they go off to a beef operation.
Okay, I gotcha.
Do you see? Yeah, and it is a challenge with all of the codes. It is a challenge between beef, dairy, and veal on the overlaps and what's different. And I'm just going to give you an example that we deal with regularly here in Ontario is tethering. We, in the veal code, at the December 31st, 2019, we were no longer allowed to tether our veal. The dairy farm can still tether, and a beef there's a thing in the beef code that says like tethering only if you have to do it for a short period or something like that. Don't quote me, because so we get where our codes overlap between dairy and veal on the tethering. A dairy farmer who's starting some calves for the veal industry, is he allowed to tether or not? Right. So that it's those overlaps, because the codes are always being written at different times. It's not like we all sat down, beef, dairy, and veal, and we wrote our codes during that same time period. Dairy did theirs in 2009, beef did theirs in 2013, we had ours in 2017. So every 4 or 5 years, our production practices are strongly encouraged to change.
Yes.
If you know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they're strongly encouraged to update, and it's about raising the bar. And just, how far does that bar get raised before it's not feasible for producers to farm anymore?
That's fantastic. No, it's just always, as I've been researching some of these beef on dairy resources, I just come across a few of these little intricacies.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder.
And when the 5-year reviews come forward, it's possible they get picked up then. Like I mentioned, the dairy code is being updated now, so there will be something different again in there. Our veal code, where this is our 5-year review, is coming up, and then beef will be up for their 10-year review shortly too. So it'll get changed again, and then hopefully we can have more of similarities closer instead of little. It's hard for a farmer who's a dairy farmer who's raising some veal and raising some beef. Where do I fit?
Yeah, exactly. I would like to thank you, Kendra. We're running out of time. This was a fantastic little conversation that we had. I hope the listeners appreciated it, and I appreciate you popping on and chatting about some of these sort of tough conversations that we don't tend to have in a public forum. So really appreciate you joining us here on Simply Verified Beef.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, for having me. And you're going to post a link to our calfcare.ca, Veal Farmers of Ontario. If anybody's looking for any resources, we're more than happy to help. Any questions, feel free to reach out. And be sure to follow us on Calf Care on Facebook.
Yes, and we will put all of those links in the show notes so that people can find them and follow, because like I said, the Veal Farmers of Ontario has some great content. And even just some of the calf care things that you put out are good for any calf. It's not
absolutely
not prejudiced.
A calf is a calf. It doesn't matter its color.
Okay, well, thank you, Kendra.
Thank you very much, Amy.
I'd like to thank our sponsors again, since without them, we couldn't have this fabulous show for you guys to tune into.
So thank you to the Canadian Agricultural Partnership through New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. And we will see you next month. See you next month.
Catch you guys later.